Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take the sources you provide and really pull out the key insights, getting you up to speed quickly.
That's the goal. Be informed, fast.
So today we're digging into something pretty foundational, the historical path of the American Constitution.
Right, and how that history helps us understand the different ways people think about politics in America today. We'll use that four-quadrant chart idea that came up in the sources.
Exactly. You, the listener, want to grasp these big ideas thoroughly, but without getting bogged down. So that's our mission.
We'll trace the Constitution story, unpack that chart, the axes, the quadrants, what they mean, and give some context to the terms.
Okay, let's jump in. The sources use this great metaphor to start a romance between father liberalism and mother democracy. Small L, small d. What's the idea there?
Yeah, it's a helpful way to think about it. It points to these two, distinct traditions that kind of came together. Father liberalism, born out of all those European religious wars.
Right, the need to just agree to disagree.
Exactly. That's the core. Plus, individual rights, life, liberty, property, keep your stuff. Thinkers like Locke were huge. Later, Adam Smith on the economic side. It's about that personal freedom.
And mother democracy. A bit different.
A bit different, yeah. The sources suggest it grew up more on the American frontier, maybe less structured initially, rooted in those early communities governing themselves.
Like covenant communities.
Precisely. Mixing rule of law with self-government. The sources even mention ancient Athens as a kind of historical parallel. People like Gordon Wood, Fox and Pope, they explore this tradition.
But then the story introduces a darker element, uncle slavery.
Yeah.
How does that fit, or rather not fit?
Well, it's the necessary, awful counterpoint, isn't it? Uncle slavery stands for the horrific reality of the slave trade and how deeply it got embedded in the Americas.
A total contradiction to both liberalism and democracy.
A complete contradiction. And scholars like Robin Blackburn, Nicole Hannah-Jones, they've shown just how devastating it was. And what's really insidious is how some ideas from father liberalism, like property rights, were twisted.
Twisted to justify owning people. Grim.
Incredibly grim.
So the sources highlight a difference in how these two parents viewed liberty. Can you break that down?
Sure. Father liberalism is really focused on negative liberty.
Meaning freedom from interference.
Exactly. Freedom from the government stepping in mostly, your own private sphere.
Right.
Mother democracy, though, emphasized having a voice, participating. In a democratic sense, that leans towards positive liberty.
Positive liberty.
Yeah.
The ability to actually do things, to participate.
Right. The power to shape your community and its rules. It's not just about being left alone. It's about having agency within the group.
Then comes July 4th, 1776. The elopement, as the source puts it. The Declaration.
Yeah, a great metaphor. It's the moment these two ideas, individual rights and self-government, are formally joined in the American project. A statement of intent.
And their child, born later in 1787, is republicanism. The Constitution. How's that described?
As a blend, really. Equal parts liberalism and democracy, ideally. Built on rights, yes, but also self-determination through representation and the rule of law holding it together, an attempt to balance the parents' traits.
The narrative then shifts focus to the republic, the nation itself trying to live up to these constitutional ideals. But it wasn't easy, was it? Combining liberalism and democracy.
No, it's inherently tricky. How much individual freedom versus how much collective decision-making or social unity. That's the constant tension, safeguarding the one without undermining the other.
A balancing act.
Always. The early debates were all about finding that balance.
The Constitution comes of age, the source says, when the Declaration's ideals, especially with the Bill of Rights, get more embedded. What does that mean?
It means the aspirational language of the Declaration of Equality, unalienable rights, started getting baked into the actual legal structure. The Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments were crucial. They connected the why from the Declaration to the how of the Constitution.
But there was worry early on, right, about too much father liberalism, too much individualism, maybe weakening the community.
Yeah, that was a concern. If everyone's just focused on their own rights, do you lose that sense of common good, of shared responsibility? How do you build social glue in a system that prizes autonomy?
And that's where Tocqueville comes in, his observations about Americans joining groups.
Exactly. Tocqueville was fascinated by how Americans formed all these voluntary associations, clubs, charities, local groups. It showed liberty didn't have to mean isolation.
So freedom could actually lead to community building.
That was his point. People using their freedom to work together, solve problems, build social connections outside of government control, a sort of civic culture nurtured by liberty.
Okay, let's talk structure. The compound republic, federalism, the Bill of Rights. How did these try to manage power?
The idea was to divide power. Federalism splits it between national and state governments. And the Bill of Rights put clear limits, specifically on the federal government.
Ah, but that's the source mentions, right? The limits were mostly on federal power.
That's the crucial loophole. The Bill of Rights didn't initially restrict the states in the same way, and that allowed Uncle Slavery to thrive in the South, protected by state laws, even using distorted liberal arguments about property.
Which leads us inevitably to the Civil War. How did that catastrophe change the Constitution's instructions?
Fundamentally, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were revolutionary. Abolishing slavery, guaranteeing due process and equal protection at the state level, extending voting rights. It was a massive shift, giving the federal government power to enforce liberty within states.
The second founding.
That's what many call it, yeah. Trying to finish the job, to align the nation's reality more closely with its founding ideals.
But, as the source stresses, ending slavery didn't end racism.
No, absolutely not. A vital point. Legal changes are one thing, but deeply rooted prejudice and systemic inequality are another. The South resisted, found ways around the new rules, and even Supreme Court decisions sometimes narrowed the scope of those amendments.
So, after the Civil War and these huge constitutional shifts, the narrative connects this to the Second Industrial Revolution. What was that link?
Well, the post-war era saw this incredible economic boom, industrialization, railroads, massive growth. But this also created huge new problems. Things like giant corporations, monopolies, terrible working conditions, rapid urbanization, immigration changing the social fabric. These were market weaknesses. The original constitutional framework wasn't really designed to handle.
So the old focus on just limiting government wasn't enough.
It seemed increasingly inadequate for many people facing these new industrial realities. The Republic, in the story's terms, needed, well, therapy.
And it found a positive liberty therapist. What does that mean?
It signifies a shift in thinking about liberty again. Not just freedom from negative liberty, but also freedom to. The idea that government might need to actively step in to create conditions where people could actually live free lives, access to education, fair wages, safe workplaces.
Which brings us to the progressive era. How did this therapy manifest?
You see a huge expansion of government activity. Laws regulating business, protecting consumers, conserving resources. The administrative state starts to grow agencies focused on specific problems.
And those 4 big amendments happened then, too.
Right. Income tax, direct election of senators, prohibition, women's suffrage, all reflect either increased federal power or broader democratic participation, very much in that progressive, positive liberty spirit.
They even thought they could export this model globally during World War I.
There was definitely a sense of confidence, maybe overconfidence, that this American approach, blending democracy and this new positive liberty, could fix the world's problems.
Okay, but then the story says the Republic fired the therapist, but kept the tools, hiring different handymen, liberals, conservatives, libertarians, identity politics folks.
Yeah, the progressive consensus didn't last, but the idea of using government for positive liberty goals stuck around. It just became a tool used differently by competing political movements that emerged.
Which leads us perfectly into the Four-Quadrant Chart.
Oh.
This chart, the source says, helps map the political landscape after that progressive consensus shattered. It has 2 axes. Let's start with the vertical one. Unity at the top, tolerance at the bottom.
Right. Think of this as a spectrum. Up top, unity values things like social cohesion, shared values, collective purpose. It resonates with that mother democracy idea the group is important.
And the bottom, tolerance.
That emphasizes individual rights, accepting diverse lifestyles and viewpoints, personal autonomy. It connects back to father liberalism, protecting the individual sphere.
Okay, vertical axis. Unity versus tolerance. Now the horizontal one.
Yeah.
Substantive equality on the left, formal equality on the right. What's the difference?
This is about how you approach equality. On the left, substantive equality focuses on the outcome. It asks, are things actually fair in practice? And if not, maybe we need different approaches for different people to level the playing field.
So maybe adjusting the rules or resources to get a fair result.
Exactly. Whereas formal equality on the right emphasizes equal treatment under the law, same rules for everyone, regardless of their background or starting point. The focus is on the process being identical for all.
Got it. Process versus outcome, in a way.
That's a good shorthand, yeah.
Okay, let's put them together. Top left quadrant. Liberalism, starting around the 1920s, gaining steam with the Depression. How does it fit?
So top left combines unity, collective well-being, with substantive equality, concern for fair outcomes. Think New Deal, Great Society. It generally favors negative liberty for expression speech, lifestyle choices.
But positive liberty for the economy.
Yes. Using government to address economic inequality, racial injustice, gender gaps. The metaphor might be adjusting the bicycle size for each rider to ensure they can all finish the race together. Key question. Is the outcome fair for everyone?
Right. Now, top right, conservatism, emerging mid-century, partly as a reaction. Where does it land?
Top right also values unity, social order, tradition, but pairs it with formal equality, same rules for all. Generally, it supports negative liberty in economics free markets.
But positive liberty elsewhere.
Often, yes, in promoting traditional values, family, religion, patriotism, believing the state has a role in upholding these for social stability, the metaphor. Maybe everyone gets the same standard bicycle. Key question, is the rule the same for everyone?
Okay, moving down, bottom left. Identity politics, really taking off in the 70s. How does it map?
Bottom left combines tolerance, recognizing diverse identities, with substantive equality, focusing on outcomes for specific groups. It often uses positive liberty concepts to push for changes in thinking, language, and institutions to address oppression faced by marginalized groups.
So, still focused on fair outcomes, like the top left, but maybe with more emphasis on specific group identities and cultural transformation.
That's a fair characterization based on the source. It also uses that adjust the bike size idea, but focuses intensely on historically oppressed groups. Key question again, is the outcome fair for everyone, particularly marginalized communities?
And finally, bottom right, libertarianism, gaining traction from the 50s onwards.
Bottom right pairs tolerance, maximum individual freedom, with formal equality, same rules. It's all about strong negative liberty, minimal government everywhere, both economically and personally.
Maximum freedom, minimal interference.
Exactly. Let individuals make their own choices, succeed or fail based on those choices, and equal application of basic laws. It traces back to classical liberal ideas, even the revolution itself in some ways. Same bicycle, same rules.
Key question, are individual rights protected for everyone?
And the source reminds us crucially about little d democracy versus big D Democrats, little N liberalism versus big L liberals. Yes, very important. The chart is about underlying philosophies, not just party labels. Someone in the Democratic Party might hold views closer to the top left, but not always, and vice versa for Republicans and the top right. These are broader tendencies.
So that vertical axis really shows the tension. Unity mother democracies focus on the collective versus tolerance father. Liberalism's focus on the individual.
Absolutely. It maps that core tension we talked about earlier, the one running through American history, community versus autonomy.
It's fascinating how the historical journey leads into these different modern perspectives. The chart really clarifies those underlying values.
It does. It helps you see why people disagree so fundamentally sometimes. They're often starting from different core assumptions about liberty, equality, and the role of government rooted in that complex history.
Understanding those roots, those different quadrants, gives so much context to today's debates.
Definitely. It moves beyond just headlines and helps understand the deeper philosophical current.
So a final thought for our listener. Thinking about this whole journey, the romance, the struggles, the evolution, and these four resulting quadrants, which of these directions, these alternative constitutional futures represented on the chart, seems most compelling to you personally, and why? Something to chew on.
A great question to ponder. How do these historical threads and philosophical outlooks resonate with your own view of where things should go?